When you think of the Wild West, what's the first image that pops into your head? For so many of us, it's this one moment, the gunfight at the OK Corral. It's practically burned into the American imagination. But what if I told you the story we all think we know? You know, the heroic lawmen versus the snarling villains? What if that's just a ghost, a legend born from the dust and desperation of a silver boomtown? All right, let's dig in and see what we can find.
So, the curtain rises on a scene we all recognize, right? The Earp brothers, with the legendary Wyatt in the lead, walking into town like they're the embodiment of civilization itself. The legend tells us they were the guys who brought law to a lawless land. The good guys, the righteous force. It's that simple, powerful story of good versus evil that Hollywood has been selling us for 100 years. But, you know, the real story, it's never that clean. I mean, just think about this for a second. The entire event, this culture-defining gunfight that spawned countless books and movies, it was over in 30 seconds. 30 seconds of pure chaos, gun smoke, and death that would echo for more than a century. And that explosion of violence, turns out, that was just the beginning of the story, not the end.
To really get to the truth, we have to start peeling back all those layers of myth. We're going to unmask the real story, and we're going to start with the most basic fact of all, the location. Because, believe it or not, even the name of this legendary gunfight is a lie.
So, let's start right there. Where did this epic showdown actually take place? At the OK Corral? Obviously, right? I mean, it's in the name. Well, the truth is buried just a few steps away from where the legend would have you believe.
Yeah, no joke. The gunfight actually happened in a dusty, narrow lot right next to a place called C.S. Fly's boarding house. So why the name? Well, let's be honest. The gunfight in the vacant lot 6 doors down doesn't exactly have that legendary ring to it, does it? The name was a branding choice, and it was the very first myth built around those 30 seconds.
Okay, next up, let's talk about the players in this drama. The story paints this really simple picture. You've got your white-hatted heroes and your black-hatted villains. But the moment you look a little closer, those clear lines they blur into this messy, complicated shade of gray. This wasn't some morality play. It was a collision of ambitious and deeply flawed men.
Let's just take Wyatt Earp. The legend frames him as this heroic U.S. Marshal, a pure symbol of justice. But the man who actually rode into Tombstone was, well, he was a lot more complicated. He wasn't on some noble quest for law and order. He was there to get rich from the silver boom. He was an opportunist, a wanderer with a rap sheet that included horse theft, escaping from jail, and even working as a pimp and an enforcer. He was a man of his time, driven by the same hunger for money and status as everybody else.
And what about the bad guys, the so-called cowboys? They weren't some unified gang of outlaws just terrorizing innocent people. Nope. They were this loose network of ranchers and, yeah, cattle rustlers, who were actually a really powerful local group with deep economic and political ties. To some folks, they were customers. To the Democratic ranchers, they were allies. And to the Earps, they were rivals.
So, if it wasn't a simple showdown between good and evil, what in the world was it? This is where we get into the hidden wisdom of the story, the part nobody really talks about. The gunfight wasn't just a feud. It was the violent eruption of a town literally at war with itself. It was about politics, money, personal ambition, and all of it was just drenched in paranoia. The whole thing was just a perfect storm waiting to happen. You had a political war between Republican business owners, who the Earps represented, and the rural Democratic ranchers, who were allied with the cowboys. You had an economic clash for control over a booming silver town. You had a media war fought by 2 rival newspapers, and right at the heart of it all was personal ambition. Wyatt Earp wanted the sheriff's job, and a secret backroom deal he tried to make with a cowboy informant went disastrously wrong.
You have to understand, the truth of what happened was being shaped from the very first minute. Tombstone had 2 newspapers, and each one was basically a propaganda machine for an opposing side. The Tombstone Epitaph, which was pro-Republican, painted the Earps as these heroic defenders of law and order. Meanwhile, the Democratic Nugget cast them as brutal aggressors. Your hero was their villain, and it all depended on which paper you picked up that morning.
This whole conflict didn't just boil over in a single day. Oh no, this was a slow burn of tension that just kept escalating. A botched stagecoach robbery in the spring of '81 made everyone more suspicious. Then in the fall, the Earps arrested a couple of cowboys, which led to open threats of revenge. And then, on the night of October 25th, a drunk and furious Ike Clanton stumbled through Tombstone's saloons, publicly screaming that he was going to kill the Earps. The fuse was officially lit.
But the personal fuse, the thing that really set Ike Clanton off, was a secret. See, Wyatt, wanting to boost his chances in the sheriff selection, had secretly offered Ike reward money to betray 3 wanted cowboys. But the plan completely fell apart when those wanted men were killed somewhere else. The deal was dead, but the secret wasn't. Ike became obsessed with the paranoid fear that Wyatt would expose him as a snitch, which was basically a death sentence in his world. And that terror twisted into this white-hot hatred aimed right at Wyatt Earp.
So after that 30-second storm of bullets, the dust didn't settle. In fact, it got churned up by a new, much more brutal wind. The gunfight wasn't the end of the story, it was just the prologue to a much, much darker chapter. One where the line between justice and revenge would be completely erased in blood.
And that shootout didn't unite Tombstone against the bad guys. Not at all. It fractured the community right down the middle. A perfect example? The funeral for the 3 dead cowboys. It was one of the largest processions in the town's history. Thousands of people turned out to mourn the men the Earps had just killed. This was not a town celebrating its saviors. It was a town picking sides in a war.
Now, despite all this public division, the Earps and Doc Holliday were arrested and put on trial. And after a whole month-long hearing, a judge, who, just happened to be a friend of the Earps, acquitted them. The official verdict was justifiable homicide. The law had spoken, but the streets were far from finished.
The Cowboys' answer to that verdict was swift, and it was brutal. In December, Virgil Earp was ambushed on the street, crippled for life by a shotgun blast. Then, in March of the next year, Morgan Earp was shot in the back and murdered while he was just playing a game of billiards. This had escalated way past a street fight. This was now a campaign of assassination. And this is where the story takes its darkest turn. After Morgan was murdered, a judge reportedly pulled Wyatt aside and gave him some private advice. He basically said, forget the courts, forget due process. Alibis don't count out in the brush. It was a shocking, off-the-books blessing to just unleash hell.
And that is exactly what Wyatt did. Consumed by grief and this burning need for vengeance, he formed his own federal posse. He became a man operating completely outside the very laws he once claimed to enforce. This was the infamous Vendetta Ride, where Wyatt Earp became his own judge, jury, and executioner.
Wyatt's posse didn't waste any time. They hunted down the men they held responsible. Frank Stillwell was cornered in a railroad yard and shot to pieces. Florentino Cruz was tracked down and killed. Curly Bill Brocius, one of the most notorious cowboy leaders, met his end from the blast of Wyatt's own shotgun. It was a brutal, terrifyingly efficient campaign of revenge.
And here is the ultimate, stunning irony of the whole thing. In his quest for vengeance, Wyatt Earp, the legendary lawman, became a fugitive from the law himself. An arrest warrant was issued for him for the murder of Frank Stillwell. The man who supposedly brought order to Tombstone had officially become an outlaw.
So, here's what it all comes down to. The story of the OK Corral isn't really about good versus evil. It's about the blurry, violent, messy line between them. And it forces us to ask a really tough question that still echoes today. When a system breaks down, when the law fails to protect you or deliver what you see as justice, what do? Does personal revenge become the only kind of justice there is? That is the true, uncomfortable legacy of those 30 seconds in the dust.